Nothing.
Day that on for Tuesday, Chaf Beis Kislev Tavshin Peyal, the third Perek Shlishi of Hilchos Shvisas Yom Tov. So in this Perek, the Rambam deals with how you go about preparing food on Yom Tov. In light of what we learned in Perek Aleph regarding Yom Tov, what we learned in Perek Aleph, that it's also to do any malacha, any avodah, unless it's l'tzorech achila. Because it says nefesh, so you could do l'tzorech achila. And then later in Perek Aleph it said that every malacha, if you did it on Yom Tov shaloi l'tzorech achila, you get malchus, except for hitzah and havara, carrying and lighting a fire, you could do for any reason. But otherwise, it's narrowly mutter only if it's for the purpose of achila. So if it's shchita, afiyah, lisha, then we'll be okay. If it's ariga, ksiva, binyan, then not okay. But then we're going to get into this in detail in this parak about particular details that relate to food preparation on Yom Tov. So we begin with kisei hadam. Now, so we'll start halacha. So if you have dirt or ashes that are prepared and you're allowed to carry them, or maybe it's offer muchan, prepared earth, and afer, which you're allowed to carry. What? Yeah. So then you're allowed to shech the chay and oif and do kisei adam, right? The behema does not need kisei adam, but a chay and oif do. So if you have prepared dirt, you can use it. Now, to understand this a bit better, this is coming immediately after the preceding Perek. Perek Beis concluded. Perek Beis was dealing with Muktzah and Yom Tov, and Perek Beis concluded with the discussion of preparing dirt for Yom Tov. But instead of quoting from there, I'll quote from the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch in Siman Tov Tzadik Ches. The Alter Rebbe discusses preparing dirt for Yom Tov. So he says, if you prepared a lot of dirt out of Yom Tov, and it's this big pile, then you can certainly carry it on Yom Tov. It's not muktzah at all, because as long as it's piled up, it's clear that it's intended for use. But the Alter Rebbe says, when it's a lot, so it's not bottled the earth. But if you brought a box of earth and you spread it out in your garden, so now it's bottled to the karka, you can't carry it anymore. And then if it's taka your garden, but if you brought a box of dirt into your house, we know back then the houses had dirt floors, and you spread the dirt out in your house, then it's not bottled to the karka, and you could carry it back and forth. But that's if it's in a particular corner, because if it's in a corner, you're not stepping on it. If it's literally in the middle of your house and you're stepping on it, then it looks like you don't want it. But if it's in the corner, it's not bottled to the earth, and it's clear that it's for your tzrachim, and you have in mind you'll use it for whatever you need. Then the Alter Rebbe says that you can use it for whatever you want. When you brought it in, bistam, you didn't specify why you're bringing it in. So minastam, it's for any particular use. But if you brought it in out of Yom Tov specifically because you might shecht an animal and you'll need dirt for kisei adam, so then you can't use it if some other mishap happens. If there's tzaya, it's not what you had in mind. Yeah. And this is a rule for Yom Tov that if you were making it for a davar vadai, then you can't use it for something that was only a suffix to you when you prepared it. And then lots of Amedvar that when by picking up the earth, you're not going to create a guma, depending on the composition of the dirt. Alter Rebbe gets into there. So if it's going to create a guma, that might create more problems. So we're assuming that's not an issue. And Ayin Sham, more details there in Siman Tov Tzadik Ches. So that's just some background for having the dirt in the first place. Now, if you have this dirt and you shecht it, so now you can do kisei adam. Great. If you don't have dirt that you prepared or ashes that's right for this purpose, so you shouldn't shecht because you're supposed to do kisei adam, and you're not going to be able to do kisei adam, so don't shecht. And what if you shecht it anyway? You can't do the mitzvah. It overrides. You can't do the mitzvah.
Of what? Of shchita.
You shechted already, so you can't do the mitzvah of kisei adam until Matzei Yom Tov.
Is kisei adam ma'akev shchita?
Well, we said first hareza lo yishchit. You shouldn't. You ought not.
You shouldn't, but he did.
So the shchita is a good shchita. You didn't do a mitzvah of kisei adam. You can't do it because
doesn't prevent. You can still eat the chicken.
Yeah, I don't think it affects the kashrus at all. Yeah. The creature, we're not sure if it's a chay or if it's a behemoth. Chazal, of course, is known as a koi. but the Rambam doesn't mention the name. It just says a bria that has the suffix. So so then you shouldn't shecht it because we don't want to do kisi adam for such an animal where it's only a suffix. Because if it's a chay, it's mechuyev. If it's a behem, it's not. It's a suffix. We don't want to do kisi adam is suffix. Behem shachar, and what if you shecht it anyway? Lo yechas adam yad le'erev. Again, you should not do it until the evening. I feel like you offer muchan or even if you have whatever the dirt you need is. Why? Why shouldn't you do it? Shema yemer haraya. Maybe someone watching will say, chaya v'adoy. See, the guys don't kiss adam on Yom Tov must mean it is a real chaya. Well, kiss adam on Yom Tov, that's why they kiss adam. Another difference between a chaya and a behema is the chaylev. Behema doesn't need kiss adam, but the chaylev is mutter, and the chaya is the opposite. So you see the person doing kiss adam, you say, sounds like he's going fully for the sheet or the understanding that it's a chaya. So I guess the chaylev must be mutter too. That's not correct. So therefore, you shouldn't do the kisei adam misafek on Yom Tov, even if you have the offer. Interestingly, I've seen people write that the word koi is actually the same word as the word cow in English. The word cow comes from German "kuh," and the "kuh" comes from koi. It's a word in Indo-European languages that means big animal, something like that.
Yeah, but why should something that's related to it's a cow? Okay.
Well, obviously the koi itself is not.
It's not a cow.
It's not a cow.
Because then it would be vadei behema.
Right, but
So
the word refers to some kind of large animal. Yeah, so interesting. Continuing in halacha beis. Halacha beis is a continuation. Another din. Let's say you shechted it before Yom Tov, and now it's kisei adam time now, and it's Yom Tov. Lo yechas adam b'Yom Tov. You can't do kisei.
Is it possible that a koi could be an animal that has the simonim of choose its cut and has split hooves, but only lives in the wild? For example, I forgot a giraffe.
Right. I don't think a giraffe. There's a whole discussion about what the koi is and what the suffix is, and some say it's crossbreeding. The father is one, the mother something else. There's all kinds. That's a whole parsha for itself. Maybe there's a place in the Rambam where it's the proper subject there. So if you shechted a chay and a oif erev Yom Tov, lo yechas adam b'Yom Tov, you can now do the kisei adam on Yom Tov for something that you shechted before Yom Tov. Shachar beim chay v'oif b'Yom Tov. If you shechted any of these three, but you shechted all three on Yom Tov, in this arev damam, and now the blood got mixed up. So there's blood here that is chayav and kisei adam, but there's also blood of a behema mixed in here. That's not chayav kisei adam. Lo yechasa oisoi ad le'erev. You should not do it until the evening. Now, the principle here in halacha beis essentially is you shouldn't be doing extra tircha on Yom Tov. So that's why you shechted it erev Yom Tov. You should have done it then. Now it's already Yom Tov. This is extra tircha for Yom Tov, but why are you doing this now? Or the behema. In order to kisei dam properly, you're going to have to cover all the blood of all the animals. And some of the blood, one of those animals is not really chayiv and kisei dam, so you're doing tircha for no reason. But if you have dirt that's prepared, and you can do one shovelful will cover it in one shot. The word dekira comes from the word decker, which was mentioned at the end of Perek base. It refers to the shovel that's used for the dirt. So if you could do it in one shot, so there's no extra tercha, so then in that case you could do it. So that would be the test. If you look at the Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, back there in Siman Tav Tzadik Ches, so the Alter Rebbe says if you have the Efer, you have the offer that you can use Muchamed of Yom Tov, and you're allowed to carry it on Yom Tov the way it was explained, so then you can shecht and do Kisei Adam. Alter Rebbe adds that you're allowed to even put, if you go to Kaparas, so that's probably the opportunity we usually get to see how it's done. So there's already offer and Efer under. The blood falls on offer and Efer, and then you cover it with more. So he says it's mutter to also put it preemptively under it, that maybe you'll change your mind. So it turned out you put dirt and then you walked away. You never did anything with it. It's tirchush leitzar. We're not chayshish. So you could do it the way the minhag is to put the offer on bottom as well. Alter Rebbe also says that if you don't have the offer and efer, then you shouldn't be shechting because how are you going to do the mitzvah? If you went and did, so the Alter Rebbe adds, and it's mentioned in Chazal, that if you have efer kira, if you have an oven and there's ashes in the oven, or offer that's not muchan, but at least there won't be a guma, then you're still allowed to go and use it, even though it's not prepared, even though it's muktzah. because mitzvahs kisui shehimen atayra according to Alter Rebbe doicha iser tiltul muksa sheinem element devreim. So according to Alter Rebbe, it depends. Then the Alter Rebbe adds after Hilchos and Siflam and Beis, but if there's two isurim, if there's a muktzah and a guma, if you're going to be doing both, then like Rasu Chacham levata devreim kol kach. Then the Chacham say, hey, too much. You're overriding us too much. I mentioned earlier that you're creating a guma on that's I guess similar to Chayrish or whatever that is. All of a sudden, here's where I guess the Rambam will say that the Rambam didn't specify those details. So it sounds like even if it's one Dirabban according to the Rambam, you don't do it. So yesh kayach b'yad chachamim to be oiker mitzvahs asay min ha'Torah because it's shev al tais. So it's in action. You're just not doing anything. You're not doing kisei adam. I mean again the koi. Interestingly, that Rebbe adds that when did we say you're not allowed to cover the koi and yamtiv when you shechted it in a corner where no one would ever be walking? But if you shechted it in the middle of your yard, and again, there's dirt, there's blood on the dirt, so even a dam behema, the Alter Rebbe says, which certainly isn't chayav, even misafik in kisei adam, you can cover the blood with afer muchan because Pasha don't want your yard to have blood in the middle, right? That's just a different type of life. Dirt yard, you're shechting animals, there's blood, so you're allowed to cover that up according to the Alter Rebbe, and no one will make a mistake. They see if it's a koi or if it's a behema, they understand it's not a chaylev, not a behema chaya issue. It's just you're cleaning up your yard. There are more details there. See there for more. Moving on to Lacha Gimel, the din of whether you can clear away the spot where you want to apply the knife, where you want to shach l'shech b'yom v'yamtiv. Mutulei litlesh tzamer l'mekayim hasakan b'yad. You're allowed to pluck wool where the knife will go with your hand. But then you can't actually remove the wool from its place. Al yishar sham mesubach b'shar tzamer hatzaver has to remain there, just tangled with the rest of the wool in the neck area. The bird la yimrit, there you cannot remove any feathers at all. That's already mamish the derech, and Rebbe soon explains a bit more of the significance of saying that it's the derech.
I couldn't find the word koi anywhere here.
Right.
They used the word bria.
I said the Ram didn't mention the word. The Ram just said bria.
Where's the word koi?
Yeah, but ordinarily that's what we refer to as the koi.
I'm just saying. Yeah.
So, but the oif, you cannot pluck the feathers because that's the derech. V'nimtza toilish b'yamtiv, that's outright toilish. So, the Maggid Mishnah mentions that the Ramban disagrees with the bird or the halach of the bird, and apparently that's not often in the Gemara. The Gemara talks about the behema. The Ramban says that ultimately, once you shecht it, of course you're going to pluck off all the feathers in order to eat it. That's part of preparing for food preparation. So if you're going to pluck the feathers off after the shchita and Yom Tov, so might as well pluck it off before the shchita. Rashba said you should mach like the Rambam, and the Maggid Mishnah says I agree with the Rambam. It's right because before you shecht it, it's not eichel, it's not edible, it's not food, and
the reason why you're plucking the feathers in that area is so the knife can go in smoothly and not make any. You don't want any problems with the shchita.
Right.
And it's Yom Tov, so you don't want to mess up.
Right.
So it's machshidin mitzvah.
Yeah. So I'm going to get to Alter Rebbe will explain a bit more clearly what the issue is. But assuming that you can't just do it, so he's saying before shchita it's not eichel. It says b'chalal a behema when it's alive has a cheskas iser. That's how we look at a behema. Until you know that it's geschachten. So you need only dvarim hamachshinin behechrech. Dvarim hamachshinin behechrech, that's just the shchita. The shchita is the davar hamachshir behechrech. Mamash need it in order to eat, but in order to get a finished product. Whereas this is not behechrech. He says Tlish is not the hechrech la'asayis akedem hashchita. So until it becomes eichel, you can't do it. Look at the Alter Rebbe. Alter Rebbe says in Sifchav Gimel that the way the Alter Rebbe says it is a bit differently. The Alter Rebbe says not to pluck the wool even from the sheep in order to make room, even though it's not derech geziza, and if you were to do this on Shabbos, that would not be considered geizes, but still you're being eiker davar migidulai. It's just cutting something off from its life source. You're not allowed to do it on Yom Tov, and there's no tzedek achila because you're able to shach even without doing that. And for this reason, if you shach the bird on Yom Tov, you should not pluck the feathers to make room because you're also being eiker davar migidulai. Plus, the Alter Rebbe says if you were to do this on Shabbos, you would be chayiv mishum goizes mipnei shudarkai. That's where the significance of shudarkai is. This is actually derech of gziza. Because that's what you do with a bird. You pluck feathers. There's no other way to do gziza on a bird. However, the Alter Rebbe says you're allowed to move the wool out of the way, push it out of the way in either direction without having the kavanah to pull it out. And then if it comes out, then you weren't miskaven. Dovshin miskaven is mutter, even midiraisa. But that's only with your hand. If you try using a knife, then it's already karav lavadai that's going to come off. And even if you're unable to shecht, unless you get that out of the way, even if it's mamish, it's stopping you, it's still also to do these things on Yom Tov because most of the time you could have done this on Erev Yom Tov. So that's that. Halacha, Daled, and Hey, salting skins on Yom Tov.
Yeah. Previous Perek that it's very different to have something shecht that's a day old as opposed to doing it in the last Perek, I think I said it.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you could have done it Erev Yom Tov, but...
Not shechted. You could have removed whatever was blocking for the shechita Erev Yom Tov.
Preparing it, make the machine from Erev Yom Tov.
Yeah. That's the final. So even if it was mamish, you can't shech without it. That's something you should have done before.
That's true, because you're making the person do that with the offer.
Right. So one thing you want to wait till Yom Tov itself is the shechita, but nothing else. Halach Dalin and Hey, salting the skins. So of course, once you shechted it, you need to take the skin off, which you could do. Another malacha that even if it's indirect, you're not eating the skin, but you have to get it out of the way. But lo yimlachanu. But then you can't salt it as you would ordinarily do. Shizeh ibudu. That's the malacha ma'aved. Why are you doing that? It's not helping you advance your meal. But you could place it where people are walking, trampling, so people are walking on it throughout. But like you pass it, and that way it won't be ruined. That's the problem. The problem is you shaved it, and now you're nervous about the skins, and you want to save it from going bad. And even that's a special hat to play. It's only because you want Yom Tov to be a joyous time. And if a person is going to feel I'm going to shach and then I'm going to lose the iris, it's not worth it. I'd rather not eat, and then it ruins your simchas Yom Tov. So in order to encourage you to shach, we let you place it. At least do that. Place it there. Or another thing you can do is you want to salt your meat for roasting. You can place the meat over the and then thereby some of the salt ends up on the and you can be a little tricky. Engage in some trickery. Ketzad malech ma'at basar pekan u'ma'at pekan samir over here, samir over there. Ad sheimlach ha'ur kulay until it gets distributed across the Halacha hey b'madharim amurim b'melech letzali. This is only said if you're salting for the purpose of roasting. Shein tzarich melech harbe doesn't need too much salt. The kedera, but to cook also melech ha'ur, that's just too much salt. No, that's not the way. That's not appropriate. Also, you have the fats. Now, what are you going to do with the fats? You don't want them to go bad. You can't eat them though, so you can't salt them. To flip them over, or to spread them out in the air on pegs. Different practices that were done with the chalev. They're not edible. So you can't. The idea we're learning here is that really only the tzedek achila. The other parts of the animal, the and the chalev, it's not la'achila, so you can't just do whatever you'd ordinarily do. Now, the Maga Mishnah says that tatum that we did mention is only when it was nishchat b'yom tov. But let's say you shechted it on Yom Tov, and then you started skinning it, and you skinned it Erev Yom Tov. Let's say you did both Erev Yom Tov, then you would not have this heter of salting things over it or placing it down on the floor. It seems clear from the Rambam, because the Rambam wrote after Ura Behema b'Yom Tov. He says that even if you shechted an Erev Yom Tov, but you skinned it on Yom Tov, it's already too late. You shechted Erev Yom Tov. It's also not the opinion of the Rashi. Look at the Alter Rebbe. This is in Siman Tov Tzaddik Tes. So the Alter Rebbe says, "B'med dvarim amurim these hatadim when it was shechted on Yom Tov. That if we don't let you do this, you won't shecht. But if it was shechted on Erev Yom Tov, even if it was skinned on Yom Tov, you're not allowed to carry the skin pasha. Putting it where people step on it is tilting. You're not allowed to carry it. You're not allowed to salt it, because how is this helping you? How is this encouraging you to shecht for Yom Tov? You already shechted Erev Yom Tov. You should have done everything else you needed to do in Erev Yom Tov also. However, If you shechted it mamish right before nightfall, and you didn't have time to skin it before Yom Tov, then all the hatadim come back in because you didn't have any time. Then the Alter Rebbe says, by the way, if you know that you don't think your skin is not gonna get ruined, so then all these hatadim also don't. Even if you shechted it on Yom Tov, it has to follow the logic. Yeah, it has to be for an urgent purpose. Alter Rebbe later in Halacha Yud talks about the chalavim, which that's the issue here. Even if the shechted on Yom Tov, why don't we say it's mutter? Because otherwise he's not going to want to shecht if you don't let him deal with its chalavim. So he says no. Here it's nicker that you're doing it for the chalav, and if we're matter him to do this, so he'll be matter to do other things with the chalav and even salt them. So, however, you are allowed to carry them. No, the Rambam didn't say that clearly. You're allowed to carry them into the shade, so at least it shouldn't go bad in the sun, or to hide them so they shouldn't get lost, because that's something that if you don't let him do it, then he might not shecht at all. And we're only being matter something so small, just tiltal, it's not going to lead to doing many more things. But if it's already in the shade or it's already in a safe place, then you will not be allowed to carry them at all. Why? Because yesterday they were still attached and part of the animal, considered the behema atzma, and now they just turned it to chalev. And what are they even for? They're only for hadlaka. That's noilad. It says when it was shechted on Yom Tov, but if it was shechted on erev Yom Tov, in this case actually that's a kula, because it's not noilad. We just said the problem with the chalev is that it's noilad on Yom Tov. So if you shechted on erev Yom Tov, so then you would be allowed to carry the chalev around if it's not muktzah, you didn't put it aside to sell for hadlaka or something. Then that's the one case where actually shechting at erev Yom Tov, now the chalev is not noilad. Halacha Vav, details relating to how you skin the animal. So it says in Halacha Vav, if you're skinning the animal a yargo b'Yom Tov, don't do hargala. No, what is that? Glad you asked. The Rambam says ketzino hamargel. You're somehow able to peel it off all from one leg, and that way the whole skin comes off as one big piece. It doesn't rip, and then you can make something out of it very easily afterwards. The reason is because it would take extra tircha to skin it in this way. And skinning it in this way isn't helping you on Yom Tov in any way. So you know, do extra tircha for no reason. Also allows us base yad bebasar. You're also not allowed to make a hole in the skin, which you then can use to hang it from the skin. That's if you do it with a knife. You can always just do whatever you do during the week. So that's not something you shouldn't do. You're allowed to make some kind of siman in the meat itself for kashrus purposes. Right? You want to make a siman, that you're allowed to do. So the Kesef Mishnah actually comments on the Rambam here about the regal achas, and he says it seems from the Rambam that mamish, if it's coming off of one leg, so he wants to be medayik from that if you don't do it in that kind of way, if you manage to get it off in one piece, but not in a way that would be described as getting it off regal achas, then it would be mutter, even though you basically have, essentially, you have the full hide, milafan of mila'achav. It didn't tear in the main places in the front, but maybe it tore by the legs. I'm not 100% proficient with skinning animals. But anyway, he says, the way we do it today is it's not regal achas, but essentially the whole thing is preserved in one piece, because it's not really, there's no bigger tircha in the way we do it compared to dafka ripping it from all sides. Alter Rebbe, this is easier than Kesef Mishnah says. However, if you look at Alter Rebbe, there in Siman Tov Tzadik Tes, Alter Rebbe says ein margilin, because it's shetereach shlo tzarech. Yesh oimrim that it's only asar if it's miregel echad, because that's an extra tircha. Yesh lahachmer kesvar harishayin. Alter Rebbe says halacha zayin meliga. So the Rambam says moilgenes haresha seraglayim. So moilig, sometimes it can mean to boil. I'm not sure if that's the taich here. It means removing the hair, removing stuff like that from the animal. So esharesha seraglayim, the head and the feet. Mahavin eisen beor. You can even hold it up to the fire, singe it in the fire to remove the hair. But that's the extent of it. You can't smear clay on it to remove the hair. Earth.
That's done by chicken. I mean, and then the older days.
Yeah. And you can't cut it with scissors.
Yeah.
Special scissors for that. But the spider shalai, and you can't trim the vegetable with the particular tools that are used for trimming vegetables. But if you have artichokes, cardoon, which is also from the artichoke family, where there are thorns around it, so that is something you could use the tools that you need in order to remove what you need to remove. The Maga Mishnah says that the Rashba says that some Go'anim said that when we said Moilgin, it's only the Reish for Raglayim, not the rest of the behemoth. Even if you plan on eating the skin, other parts of the animal, because that's only something the Mefunakin B'Yoser, only people that are very spoiled want to remove all the hair from the whole entire animal. And that already looks like it's Gameris Akalim, like finishing off a Keli, or it looks like Maisa Choil. And the other Meidahira that said that it's not just the Reish Raglayim, but that's just Bahaiva. Generally, it was just the Reish Raglayim. But anyway, the rule is you really only do purely what you need to do and no more than that. That's the principle here. Halacha Ches and Tes, kneading a dough, making a dough on Yom Tov. So mutu lolosh isa gedela b'Yom Tov. You're allowed to make a big dough on Yom Tov. Alosh isa me'erev Yom Tov. Ein ma'afish min challah b'Yom Tov. And if you kneaded the dough erev, then you can't separate challah on Yom Tov itself. Right, we know that separating challah, things like that, is usually it's considered tikkun. You bring matakin. We learned this in Hilchos Shabbos. B'mlasha b'Yom Tov, and if you did the whole process on Yom Tov itself, then ma'afish min challah, you could separate the challah of a noisna l'akayin. And the Rambam mentioned, the Rambam doesn't mention anything different about nowadays. That Rambam says you give it to the kayan. And if the dough was tamei, challah was tamei, lo yavashel es challah. So what are you supposed to do with it? So you can't cook it until it essentially gets burned. You can only do cooking. Let's say why you're supposed to be burning this. So why are you cooking it? So you can't do that. You can't just go burn it outright. There's a rule that you can't burn things like this that became tamei. Because burning something holy that became tamei, mitzvah say doing a malacha that's not serving the purpose of eating, both the mitzvahs say and the mitzvahs say, right? Because just like Shabbos, Yom Kippur, it's always this tishbois and leisasa malacha. So the assay of burning the kachim is not doicha the assay and the leisasa of not doing malacha for no reason. So you can't burn the challah either. So halacha test, keitzad, yasaba. So what should you do? So leave it till evening, and then you'll burn it. The problem is on Pesach. You leave the dough sitting around, it turns into chametz. So so the solution is you shouldn't separate the challah when it's still dough. It's called ha'isa hatmeya. You should bake the entire tamei dough. Then you should separate the challah once it's already bread.
So that's lechatchila. You can do that. For example, can you bake a bread and then cut off a big piece and give a baked piece to the kohen?
No. So clearly, we're saying that's not ordinarily what you would do, but that's going to bring to learn. Yitz Hashem, when we get the halachas of challah and things like that. Yeah. I don't want to get too much into that right now. We're going to mention a few more details here in a second.
What's the he's giving you here for Yom Tov?
So he's saying that ordinarily if it's tahar you can give it to the kohen, and if it's tamei, so leave it till the evening, separate it, leave it till the evening and burn it. And if it's Pesach, then you can bake it and separate it after baking.
It's not Pesach. Okay. We're really talking about matzah then. It's not.
Well, again, if you leave it out, it's going to turn into chametz. Of course, you're baking matzah, but what you're leaving out is going to turn into chametz.
Got it.
Now, when the Rambam mentioned that if you can't be mafresh challah on Yom Tov, if you made the dough of Erev Yom Tov, the Rabbi says actually we're machalak between the Isa of Eretz Yisrael and Chutz La'aretz, which just relates to according to halachos relating to challah. The Rabbi Taina is that the Isa of Chutz La'aretz, according to Shmuel, you can eat and then be mafresh later. So Bazoi, the challah isn't stopping you from eating.
Yeah.
So that means it's not really being mataken anything. The whole problem of being mafresh challah trumas meiser is that you're being mataken the tevel.
Yeah.
But if you're allowed to eat the Isas Chutz La'aretz, so are you really being attacking anything? So according to the Ravid, even if you was needed on Erev Yom Tov, you'd be allowed to mafresh on Yom Tov. So that's one topic. The Maggid Mishnah mentions the Rambam says v'nois ala kohen, like or be given to the kohen. So he says, look in Hilchos Bikurim or Sharmanas Kohuna. So then we're going to get into what exactly the din of Chal is, and what's the din of Eretz Yisrael, what's the din of Chutz La'aretz, what's the din of Bisman Hazeh. So that's the place to discuss all of that. When again, the Eitzah that Rambam wrote at the end about baking it. So that's really, it's actually a Mishnah in Pesachim Perek Gimel. Keitzah mafrish nechal b'tum b'yom tov, and there's three opinions there. But Eliezer says this, that don't call it challah until you bake it. Yehuda ben Beseira said put it in cold water. Pashut a practical eitzah. You put it in cold water, it won't become chametz. Yes. And Rabbi Yeshua said a very interesting thing, that this is not the chametz that you're b'chlal muzer al b'val yirah b'al yamatzah. It has to be your chametz. So this is the challah chametz. It's not your problem. So you can separate it and let it sit there and let it rise, and you don't have to care about it.
Why?
But
Because it's tameh.
well, we're talking about the case of challah b'tumah, yeah. So and it's not yours. No, the reason why it's not yours is because it's challah. I don't think it's because it's tameh. It's because it's challah. It's not yours.
Yeah, but there's a real Bal Yirah.
That belongs to you, and this challah doesn't belong to you in what?
Your mafresh is challah.
Oh.
But there's an Isser of Bal Yirah.
So we're not going to get into that whole. That's just the three shittas those are the three shittas in the Mishnah. If we see the Ram Paskin like Rabbi Eliezer to bake it first. Look in the Alter Rebbe and Simon Tov Kuf Vav, which deals with these halachas. So the Alter Rebbe says if you bake it, if you needed it on Yom Tov, if you're allowed to separate challah, even if there's no kohen to give it to, or it's a place for the challah. The Alter Rebbe mentions the idea of burning the challah. So there's no tzedach achila really in separating it, but you're allowed to separate it if you did it on Yom Tov. And even though separating Tumas and Mayersis is considered a shvos, because you're like being mataken, the dough. The komakim, how else are you going to eat the dough? And yeah, obviously we're not going here with the Ravid. We're saying that this is in order for you to eat this, you have to be mafresh challah. So if in order to do that, you have to be mafresh challah. So we let you, so even though you didn't, even though it's really a shvos. However, if it's me'erev Yom Tov, it's also mafresh challah because you should have done it me'erev Yom Tov. So what should you do if you're in Chutz La'aretz? Lamaisa, if you have a dough from erev Yom Tov, you didn't separate challah. He says what you should do is don't bake the whole dough on Yom Tov, leave some over, and after Yom Tov, you separate challah from what you left over, and that will be pater. And this works on Chutz La'aretz because it's a kula of challah Chutz La'aretz. Also, this is where that thing that I've mentioned comes in, that you can be oichel v'hoilech and then mafresh challah. So the way we implement that according to Alter Rebbe is do that after Yom Tov. Wait till after Yom Tov, and then you'll be mafresh challah mei hamashuyah. But separating challah itself is still considered a shvos. So don't do that on Yom Tov, metak and keli, if it's something you could have done me'erev Yom Tov. However, the Alter Rebbe says it would be also to bake the whole dough on Yom Tov and then leave over some to be mafresh challah after Yom Tov. Because why are you baking that part? That's the part you're not going to eat. You baked something, shalei tzedach achila, and some disagree with that. And they say, because b'shas ha'afiyah, you didn't distinguish yet which one's which, where the challah is. So it's all the tzedach yom tiv, and then later you're going to decide, this is the part I'm not going to eat. And if you don't do that, they say you'll be misbatim l'simchas yom tiv. How you won't be able to bake. So even though the ikr is like the svar achrayna, b'kamakim mishmimachber like the svar yishin. Of course, there are more details there of just giving a sampling, a selection of what the Alter Rebbe adds. Halacha Yod, baking. So you're not to bake using a brand new, very large oven. earthen oven. Apparently, it was common that you might ruin it on the first try, and that will ruin the bread. And then you won't. You'll be unhappy. So you shouldn't, risk it with that. Ein garfen tanor v'kirayim. You're not allowed to shovel the ashes out of the stove. You can press it down, pat it down to make room for other things. Me, after left is by litzis by Ellen. Can't got off, and if there's no other way to do anything unless you actually got it out, so then mutter. And if you want to be able to seal the oven, we're talking about the old ovens in those days, and you want to seal once you put something in, you want to seal it on the outside to trap the heat. So you need mud for that. Now, how are you gonna have mud? So you're allowed to take mud that's already around the river. And that's assuming that you softened it before Yom Tov. But to make mud yourself, that would be aser. That's a malacha. But you're allowed to do it with ashes. Apparently, that's not the problem of gibel. Rebbe mentions in Siman. I know we'll mention that also in Halacha. Fine. Halacha Yud Aleph. Tanor v'kirayim chadashim. You have a new stove. In Sachanaysim B'Sham B'Yom Tov, you're not to pour oil. In Shatnaysim Matlis, you're not to sort of rub them down with shave them down, smooth them down with some kind of material. And you're not allowed to pour cold water on them in order to strengthen them.
What, the shpud?
We're talking about the stove itself.
Yeah. On the stove.
And if it's to help you bake, then mutter. You can't heat the stones to roast them, to heat them up till they're white, which means they're really hot, red hot, and that way you would use the stone itself as something for roasting, for baking, because it strengthens them. But you're allowed to use this big oven. You're allowed to light the fire and bake inside that. And you're allowed to heat up water in a big, huge, like a commercial size sort of a pot. The atichi actually had like a compartment under it for the fire. You put the water in the main compartment and the fire in the small compartment. And the Maggid Mishnah says the chiddush with that you're allowed to use the perni and the antichi is that it looks a little bit like weekday activities, so we're not chayshish. That's the chiddush. The halacha from halacha yud not to use a perni chadasha, though the Alter Rebbe says in Siman Tov Kuf Zayin that if it's a big one, but with a small one it's mutter. And the Alter Rebbe adds the fichach eish lahakel b'tanurim shalanu. Right, the time of the Alter Rebbe they still were kind of using similar technology. It hadn't changed that much. It changed a little bit. The Alter Rebbe said the tanurim then they're not so big, A, and B, we don't find that our tanurim get ruined in that kind of way, even when they're new, so it shouldn't apply. And you look in Siman Tov Kuf Zayin, great arichas there about all kinds of halachas relating to baking.
What was the admin in halacha yidal, the tanurim v'kirayim chadashim b'bein Sachanaysim B'Sham B'Yom Tov, b'bein Shatnayim?
Well, you want to use them, and apparently that's a step.
If you're going to use your lefis, I got it. But if it's not lefis, what's the chiddush?
These are just common things relating to baking. Chazal went through and made a seder of what you are allowed to do that's directly related to baking. And I think just some common things that to make it clear that what we are allowed. It's not like anything in your kitchen is allowed. So sometimes there's a thin line. So they explain, which is on the allowed list and which is not. Halacha Yud Beis. Einosim Gevina b'Yom Tov. You're not allowed to make cheese on Yom Tov. Shem Gibein me'ad of Yom Tov. Ein b'zeh chesed and tam. Because this is something you could have done just as well in out of Yom Tov, and it would not affect the taste at all. So why are you waiting till Yom Tov? Avol dachen is hatzaval and kedarka, but you're allowed to grind, or whatever the correct term might be, grind the spices. The normal way, Shem Yadoch Oisam Miba'arav Yafak time was if you did it even just the evening before, right before Yom Tov, it already would lose the taste. Didn't have a way of preserving it, of storing it. Oh, Malach and Inidach b'Yom Tov, but salt cannot be done in that way. Unless you held the mortar at an angle, Or you don't do it in the pestle, you use a different bowl. So there's some kind of shinoi. So this is something where shinoi can help you do it.
So spices, you can use the mortar and pestle.
Yeah. Because salt is something you could have done from Erev Yom Tov. Nothing changes with the salt if you did it before. But here we say you could do it with a shinoi though. On Yom Tov.
That's interesting what saying. One can reuse the shinoi, one can't.
All right, so
we were talking because it affected the flavor.
Right.
The spices.
Right.
It's a very tricky thing.
Right. The Alter Rebbe gets into this in Siman Tov Kuf Dalet. It might be worth checking there. Just there's a lot of halachos, a lot of dinim. I'm just going to mention a little bit, some highlights. And you're not allowed to grind the pepper in their usual grinder. You would have to do it in the mortar and pestle like another spice, not use the specialized grinder. And Alter Rebbe explains this halacha in Siman Tov Kuf Dalet and halacha Dalet. Alter Rebbe says that the reason for this is even if you do it one by one, because when you use the grinder, you end up doing a lot in one day. Because you're doing it slowly in a meducha, you do what you need. Using a grinder, you grind a lot. So that looks like uvdin dechoil and the zilzal Yom Tov, so you shouldn't be using the grinder for that reason. And Alter Rebbe adds, for that reason, you're not allowed to use the usual grinder or whatever tool you use for the chrein, the tamcha shekrein chrein, because weiter, the derech is that you usually do enough for 2 or 3 days, not just a small amount. So that's what
Chrein says a double lach. So you're using a scraper actually.
Right. That's probably that's usually what we use even today.
A
moirag charotz, the Alter Rebbe calls it. Yeah.
So that's any vegetable or just chrein?
Where the derech is to
Let's
do
say making coleslaw. You have a
amount.
head of cabbage.
Yeah. I'm not sure if we look at it the same way. We don't have a supply of coleslaw for 2 3 days. I'm not sure. You'd have to, you have to look it up. Halacha Yud Gimel in question as arifais b'machteshes gedola. Arifais are groats. It comes up in different halachas from the grain. So you have to grind them with a big grinder. Machteshes ketana. You could use a small one. Shezahu ashinu shalom. That's the shinoi. Again, probably it's something you could have done every Yom Tov. But Eretz Yisrael, I feel b'ktana aser, and so even the small one would not be allowed. Shatvu shelahen toivahi. The tvu is so good. If you would have done it from Erev Yom Tov, there would be no problem at all. So we go all the way to the extreme here, and we say even a shinoi is no good. So again, what the question is, when do we say, yeah, with the shinoi, now with the shinoi? Not fully clear right up front. Halacha Yudalid, sifting. So if you have flour and you already sifted it Erev Yom Tov, and you already removed the big pieces, you can't do it a second time. Unless some rock, wood fell in, then you can sift them. Shina, if you did it for the shina, mutter, you're allowed to. Then shirikad me'acheri hanafa, instead of putting it directly in the sifter, you use the sifter backwards. Shirikad lagabe shulchan, we did it over the table, and maybe not into a bowl. Something, some kind of shinoi like that. Halacha Tezvav and Tezayin regarding biter. So Moilin Melilas Umafarchin Kitnias B'Yamtiv. So again, you have grains and you want to get the psilus off, or the kitnias, the beans, you want to get the psilus off. You're allowed to remove that on Yamtiv. Umenapeach al yad, and you're allowed to blow. Al yad means slowly. B'chol koicha, you can blow with all your might. Then it blows away. V'oichel, and then you can eat it. You can even use these particular bowls, vessels, these utensils. But not on the tray or in a sifter. That's considered too much like the derech of biter. Beire kedarkoi, bechekoi, betamchoi, and if you're doing outright beire with kidneys, which you're allowed to do, you could do it either in your lap or in a tamchoi, which is one utensil of leba nofa, leba tavla, leba kvara, not in sifters and things like that, or tray. That's considered too much, like the regular derech. When do we say when there's more eichel than pselas, so it's easier to just get rid of the pselas. But if there's more junk than food, then take what you need and get rid of the rest. And even and let's say we said in the Reisha that if there's more food than pselas, you could separate the pselas. What if that happens to be more difficult and it's easier to take out the eichel even though there's more eichel? But you always go with what is easier. If you want to eliminate the tercha. Finally, halacha yud zayin. You're not allowed to filter the mustard in its usual filter. It looks like beir. You can put an egg in there, and it happens on its own. And if you have the mashmeres is for the wine to go through, also sort of filters the wine. But you're allowed to put the wine if it's already hanging from before. But you shouldn't hang it. You're putting it up now on Yom Tiv, because that's too similar to the way things are done during the week. There's a trick. You can hang it up and say, I'm not hanging it for the wine, I'm hanging it for pomegranates. But you hang it up, you put some pomegranates, and then the catches the dregs of the wine.
There are two things that are very tricky. Harama